Ops room fell silent as Lieutenant Sarah, Ghost, Chen stepped up to the tactical display. 23 hardened Navy SEALs stared at her, their faces ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the map of Afghanistan's Kunar province spread before them. "She's crazy," Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez's voice shattered the silence like a gunshot. His fist slammed down on the metal briefing table, making coffee cups rattle. "With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't a plan. It's a suicide mission wrapped in a fantasy." Chen didn't flinch. At 5'6", she was the smallest person in the room, but her presence commanded attention. Her dark eyes, cold and calculating as a winter storm, swept across the faces of her teammates. She'd earned her position through blood, sweat, and more pain than most of these men could imagine. The first female to complete Bud S in her class, top of her sniper school. 3 confirmed high-value target eliminations in Fallujah, 2 Bronze Stars. And still, they looked at her like she was playing soldier. "Let me get this straight." Lieutenant Jake Hammer Morrison stepped forward, his 6'3" frame towering over the map. "You want to infiltrate a fortified Taliban compound, alone make 15 enemy combatants disappear without firing a shot at a single one of them, and you expect us to just— What? Wait and watch," he laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Lady, I don't know what they taught you at Dam Neck, but in the real world we stack bodies, not play mind games." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Chen let them talk, let them vent. She'd anticipated this reaction. She understood their skepticism. Hell, if someone had pitched this plan to her 3 years ago before Kandahar, before she'd learned what true psychological warfare could accomplish, she might have laughed too. Commander James Hayes stood in the back corner, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. At 52, he'd led more operations than anyone in the room could count. He'd seen conventional warfare, guerrilla tactics, drone strikes, and everything in between. But this was something entirely different. Chen activated the display, and aerial reconnaissance photos filled the screen. The compound sat nestled in a mountain valley, surrounded by steep cliffs and narrow passes. A fortress that had repelled 3 previous assault attempts, costing them 2 good men and countless resources. Target, Khalid Nazari, aka the Butcher. Chen's voice cut through the murmurs, clear and steady. Responsible for the execution of 3 village elders, 2 American contractors, and approximately 47 civilians in the past 6 months. He's fortified this position with 15 fighters, heavy weapons, and enough ammunition to hold off a company-sized assault for weeks. "Exactly," Martinez interrupted. "Which is why we need to hit them with everything we've got. Fast rope insertion, overwhelming force, done in 20 minutes. And lose how many men in the process?" Chen's question hung in the air like smoke. "The terrain gives them every advantage. They have high ground, interlocking fields of fire, and they've booby-trapped every approach. Your overwhelming force gets funneled into kill zones where our technological advantage means nothing. We've already lost Rodriguez and Chen." "Don't you dare use their names to justify this insanity," Morrison snapped, his face flushing red. The 2 KIAs from the last assault attempt were still fresh wounds for the team. Chen's expression softened slightly, the only crack in her armor. "I'm not using their names. I'm honoring their sacrifice by making sure we don't repeat the same mistakes. Khalid Nazari isn't just a fighter. He's a sadist who rules through fear and brutality. Men like that have a weakness." "And what's that?" Hayes finally spoke, his gravelly voice commanding immediate attention. Everyone turned to face him. Chen met his gaze directly. "They've never been the ones who are afraid." The room erupted again. "This is bullshit," someone shouted from the back. Another operator threw his pen down in frustration, but Hayes raised his hand, and silence returned like a hammer falling. "Explain," he said simply. Chen took a breath. "I infiltrate alone, establish overwatch on an elevated position, Then, over the course of 72 hours, I systematically dismantle their sense of security without killing a single person. I shoot their equipment, not their bodies. Generator, communications, water supply, vehicles. Each shot comes from a different angle, different distance, creating the illusion of multiple snipers. I leave traces, American equipment, boot prints, shell casings, in locations that suggest we've already penetrated their perimeter. I make them paranoid, make them question every shadow, every sound, every one of their own men. And then what? Hayes pressed. Then they break, they scatter, they run. And when they do, we track them. Not to 15 targets in one fortified compound, but to their safe houses, their supply lines, their network. One surgical operation becomes an intelligence gold mine that dismantles an entire cell structure. Martinez shook his head in disbelief. You're betting lives on psychological theory. I'm betting lives on proven tactics, Chen countered. I did this in Kandahar on a smaller scale. 4-man cell, fortified position. 72 hours later, they abandoned their weapons and fled straight into a CIA ambush. 0 American casualties. 4 high-value captures with actionable intelligence that led to 12 more targets. Hayes studied the photographs on the screen, then looked at Chen, really looked at her. He saw the confidence in her posture, the certainty in her eyes. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't hopping. She knew this would work. You have 72 hours, he finally said. The room exploded in protests, but Hayes's voice cut through them all. But if you're not out by hour 73, or if the situation deteriorates, we're coming in with everything we've got. Are we clear, Lieutenant? Chen nodded once, crisp and professional. Crystal clear, sir. I won't need that long. As the briefing dissolved into heated arguments, Chen gathered her gear list and headed for the door. Martinez caught her arm as she passed. You know they're calling you crazy, right? He said quietly. Chen smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Let them. By the time I'm done, those 15 fighters will think they're the crazy ones. She pulled her arm free and walked out into the Afghan sun, already mentally preparing for the hunt ahead. Behind her, Hayes watched through the doorway, a nagging feeling in his gut. Either he'd just approved the most brilliant operation of his career, or he'd sent one of his best operators to her death on a gamble. Only time would tell which. The Chinook helicopter's rotors beat against the night air like a mechanical heart, drowning out all other sound. Chen sat in the cargo bay, surrounded by darkness and the familiar smell of aviation fuel and gun oil. The crew chief held up 5 fingers, 5 minutes to insertion. She checked her gear for the 3rd time, a ritual born of training and survival instinct. Her custom M110 SAS rifle lay across her lap, every component modified to her exact specifications. Suppressor threaded tight. Schmidt and Bender scope zeroed to perfection. Bipod collapsed. The weapon was an extension of her body, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Next to it, her pack contained 72 hours of essentials, freeze-dried rations, water purification tablets, medical supplies, communication equipment, and ammunition. 50 rounds. If she needed more than that, the mission had already failed. The loadmaster's hand touched her shoulder. 2 minutes, Lieutenant. LZ is cold, but weather's turning. Storm front moving in from the north. Chen nodded, pulling on her night vision goggles. The world turned green and grainy. Perfect. The worse the weather, the better her chances. Taliban fighters didn't like operating in storms any more than anyone else did. They'd be huddled inside, confident in their mountain fortress, never expecting a lone operator to insert in these conditions. The helicopter banked hard, dropping altitude rapidly. Chen's stomach lurched, but her face remained expressionless. Fear was a luxury she'd learned to suppress years ago, back in Bud S when instructors had tried to break her simply because of her gender. They'd pushed her harder, drowned her longer, made her carry heavier loads. And she'd survived every second of it, emerging stronger than most of the men who'd started alongside her. 30 seconds. She stood, clipping her descent line to the fast rope. Through the open door, she could see nothing but darkness and the faint outline of mountains against the starlit sky. The Hindu Kush stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of valleys and peaks that had swallowed armies throughout history. Tonight, it would swallow her too, but she'd emerge again like a ghost. Go, go, go. Chen grabbed the rope and dropped into the void. The thick cord burned through her gloves as she controlled her descent, feeling the helicopter's rotor wash trying to spin her like a top. 3 seconds later, her boots hit earth. She released the rope, rolled, and came up with her rifle ready. The Chinook was already climbing, its sound fading rapidly into the distance. Within 30 seconds, silence reclaimed the mountain. She was alone. Chen took a moment to orient herself, letting her eyes adjust even behind the night vision. The insertion point was a flat section of rocky ground, surrounded by scrub brush and scattered boulders. According to the map, the enemy compound lay 3 kilometers to the northeast, across terrain that would challenge even experienced mountaineers in daylight. In darkness, it was treacherous. Good, treacherous meant safe. No one would expect her approach. She moved quickly to bury her descent rope under a pile of rocks, erasing evidence of her arrival. Then she checked her GPS, confirmed her position, and began moving. Each step was calculated, deliberate. Her boots found solid ground by feel as much as sight. The ghillie suit she wore rustled softly, blending her outline into the landscape. In daylight, she would look like nothing more than a clump of vegetation. In darkness, she was invisible. The first kilometer took 45 minutes. Chen moved through a dried riverbed, using the natural depression for concealment. Thunder rumbled in the distance, that storm front approaching. She smiled behind her face wrap. Perfect timing. The sound would cover her movement, and Taliban sentries would be focused on staying dry rather than watching the perimeter. As she climbed higher, the compound came into view through her night vision. It sat in a shallow valley, protected on 3 sides by steep cliffs. The only approach was through a narrow pass on the southern side, exactly the kind of terrain that made conventional assault suicidal. She could see the glow of lights inside the buildings, movement of guards on the walls. 15 fighters, intelligence had said. She counted 4 visible sentries, which meant at least 2 more rotating inside, with the rest sleeping or preparing for tomorrow's operations. Chen found her primary observation post on a rocky outcrop roughly 800 meters from the compound, well within her effective range, but far enough to remain undetected. The position offered clear sightlines to the main building, the generator shed, the vehicle park, and the southern approach. More importantly, the rocks behind her would diffuse her muzzle signature, making it nearly impossible to determine her exact location even if someone spotted the shot. She began setting up her hide site with practiced efficiency. First, she arranged rocks to create a natural-looking screen that would break up her silhouette. Then she cleared the ground beneath her of any debris that might make noise when she shifted position. She set up her rifle on its bipod, ranging key points throughout the compound. The generator shed, 782 meters. The radio antenna, 795 meters. The main building's entrance, 811 meters. All well within her capability. Through her scope, now switched to thermal imaging, the compound came alive with heat signatures. She began counting, identifying, cataloging. 1 sentry walked with a pronounced limp, favoring his left leg. Another stopped every hour to smoke, always in the same spot near the eastern wall. A third was young, nervous, constantly adjusting his weapon and looking over his shoulder. But it was the 4th man who drew her attention. He emerged from the main building at 200 hours, and even through thermal imaging she could sense his authority. Taller than the others, moving with purpose and confidence. The other fighters deferred to him, stepping aside as he walked the perimeter. Khalid the Butcher Nazari, her primary target. Chen watched him through her scope, studying his movements, his mannerisms, the way he constantly scanned the ridgelines as if sensing danger. Good instincts, but instincts wouldn't save him from what was coming. She noted that he checked the generator shed personally, examined the radio equipment, inspected the weapons cache. A commander who paid attention to details. That made him dangerous. It also made him predictable. As dawn approached, Chen had compiled a complete picture of the compound's routine. Guard changes every 4 hours. Generator ran constantly to power lights and communications. Water was stored in 2 large tanks on the roof of the main building. 3 vehicles, 2 technical trucks with mounted machine guns and 1 civilian SUV, probably for command and control. The storm arrived with the sunrise, dark clouds rolling across the mountains like an invading army. Rain began to fall, light at first, then building to a steady downpour. Chen remained motionless in her hide, water running off her ghillie suit like she was made of stone. The compound's guards retreated under cover, exactly as she'd predicted. Only one remained outside, huddled miserably under the eave of a building. Chen's radio crackled softly. "Ghost, this is Overwatch. Radio check." She keyed her mic twice, the signal for acknowledged, maintaining radio silence. "Copy your double-click. Weather looks bad up there. How's the view?" Chen broke protocol briefly, whispering into her mic, "Perfect. Beginning Operation Phase 1 at nightfall. Ghost out." Back at base, Commander Hayes listened to her transmission and felt that knot in his stomach tighten. Martinez stood beside him, shaking his head. "She's going to get herself killed," Martinez muttered. Hayes didn't respond. He just stared at the topographical map, at the small blue dot representing Chen's GPS beacon, alone in the mountains. Either she was the most brilliant tactical mind he'd ever worked with, or the craziest. By this time tomorrow, he'd know which. In her hide site, Chen chambered her first round and settled in to wait. The compound's inhabitants had no idea that their world was about to fall apart. They felt safe behind their walls, comfortable in their mountain sanctuary. By morning, they would understand what true fear felt like. The hunter had arrived, and the hunt was about to begin. The storm passed just after midnight, leaving the mountains draped in eerie silence. Chen had remained motionless for over 18 hours, her body adapted to the discomfort through years of training. Most people couldn't comprehend this level of patience, the ability to become part of the landscape, to let hours dissolve into nothing while maintaining absolute focus. But Chen had learned this art in the sniper course at Fort Benning, perfected it in the mountains of Afghanistan, and now wielded it like a weapon. Through her night vision, the compound glowed with artificial light. The generator hummed steadily, its diesel engine providing power to the communications equipment, lights, and the small refrigeration unit where they stored medical supplies and food. That generator was the compound's lifeline, connecting them to the outside world, giving them comfort in this harsh environment. It was time to sever that lifeline. Chen adjusted her scope, compensating for the 782-meter distance, the slight crosswind from the east, and the cold air density at this altitude. Her breathing slowed, becoming rhythmic and controlled. Heartbeat steady, mind clear. The world narrowed to nothing but the crosshairs and the target. The generator sat in a small shed with open walls, protected from the elements but exposed to her line of sight. She could see the fuel line running from the external tank into the engine, a thin metal pipe, vulnerable. One shot, properly placed, would drain the fuel and shut down the entire system without causing an explosion that might injure anyone. That was crucial. No casualties, not yet. This wasn't about killing, it was about breaking their minds. Chen exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger between heartbeats. The suppressed rifle coughed quietly, a sound that wouldn't carry beyond 50 meters. Through her scope, she watched the bullet impact exactly where she'd aimed. The fuel line ruptured, diesel spraying across the generator shed floor. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The generator continued running, using the fuel already in its system. Then it sputtered, coughed, and died. The compound plunged into darkness. Chaos erupted immediately. Voices shouted in Pashto, confused and alarmed. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness like searchlights, bouncing off walls and sweeping across the compound. Chen watched through her thermal scope as heat signatures rushed from buildings, fighters scrambling to understand what had happened. One man, the nervous young sentry she'd identified earlier, fired his AK-47 into the air, panicked. Others yelled at him to stop. The butcher emerged from the main building, his heat signature distinct from the others. Even through thermal imaging, Chen could sense his fury. He strode to the generator shed, examined the damage, and began barking orders. Two fighters ran to check the perimeter. Another began working on the generator, trying to diagnose the problem. Chen had already shifted her aim. The radio antenna rose from the roof of the main building, a thin metal rod reaching toward the sky. It was their link to other Taliban cells, to leadership across the border in Pakistan, to the network that made them dangerous. At 795 meters in darkness with a crosswind, it was a difficult shot. Chen made it look easy. The suppressed round struck the antenna's base, shearing through the mounting bracket. The antenna toppled, clattering across the roof before sliding off and crashing to the ground. The sound of metal hitting rock echoed through the valley. More shouting, more confusion. Flashlight beams now swept the ridgelines, searching for threats. But Chen was invisible in her hide sight, positioned perfectly to remain concealed even if they looked directly at her location. The rocks broke up her silhouette, the ghillie suit blended with the terrain, and the suppressor had hidden her muzzle flash. She was a ghost, and ghosts didn't leave traces. Except when they wanted to. Chen waited 20 minutes, watching the compound's activity reach a fever pitch. The butcher had organized his men into defensive positions, clearly expecting an assault. They'd set up a machine gun nest facing the southern approach, positioned riflemen on the walls, and sent a four-man patrol into the narrow pass. They were preparing for a conventional attack. They had no idea what they were actually facing. When the patrol was 50 meters from the compound, Chen took her third shot. The water tank on the main building's roof was a large plastic container, clearly visible against the night sky. Her bullet punched through it, and water began pouring out, creating a waterfall that splashed onto the compound's main entrance. The effect was immediate and devastating. The fighters believed they were under sustained sniper attack from multiple positions. 3 shots, 3 different angles, or so it seemed. The mountain walls and valleys created acoustic confusion, making it impossible to determine where the shots originated. The sound bounced, echoed, and distorted until it seemed like threats were coming from every direction. Snipers, multiple positions. Someone screamed in Pashto. Chen's language training allowed her to understand every word, and she smiled coldly. Perfect. They were seeing exactly what she wanted them to see. The butcher's response was predictable and exactly what she'd hoped for. He pulled his patrol back, consolidated his forces inside the compound, and began firing wildly into the darkness. AK-47s chattered, bullets spanging off rocks in random directions. They were shooting at nothing, at shadows, at their own fear. Chen remained perfectly still, watching the ammunition expenditure with satisfaction. Every round they wasted now was one less they'd have when they really needed it. Every minute they spent in panicked defense was another minute of psychological erosion. Back at the forward operating base, the surveillance team watched through satellite imagery, though the resolution at night was limited. Rodriguez sat at the communications station, monitoring Chen's beacon and waiting for her next check-in. "Sir, we're picking up significant small arms fire from the target compound," a young intelligence analyst reported to Commander Hayes. "Heavy volume, undirected. They're engaging." Nothing. Hayes leaned over the monitor, studying the infrared signatures. She started. Martinez joined him, coffee cup in hand. 3 shots and they're losing their minds. Maybe she's not as crazy as I thought. "She's crazier," Hayes said quietly. She's just crazy in ways that work. On the mountain, Chen had moved to her secondary position, a relocation she'd planned before the mission began. The move took her 45 minutes, crawling slowly across rocky terrain, erasing her trail as she went. Her new hide site offered a different angle on the compound, this one focusing on the vehicle park and the main gate. She settled in, ate an energy bar without taking her eyes off the target, and hydrated from her camel back. Her body was exhausted, but her mind remained sharp. Sleep would come later. Right now, she had work to do. As dawn approached, the compound was still on high alert. Guards remained at their posts, tired and jumpy. The butcher hadn't slept, she could tell. His heat signature moved constantly between positions, checking on his men, reinforcing defenses, trying to project confidence even as doubt crept into his mind. Chen waited until the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of gold and orange. The fighters would be most vulnerable now, exhausted from a sleepless night, nerves frayed, vision adjusting from darkness to light. She aimed at the side mirror of the technical truck nearest the gate. The driver sat inside, probably trying to catch a few minutes of rest. Through her scope, she could see his head lolled against the window, eyes closed. Chen's shot shattered the mirror 6 inches from his face. The driver exploded from the vehicle, screaming, falling to the ground and scrambling for cover. Other fighters opened fire reflexively, shooting at nothing. The butcher rushed to the scene, and through her scope, Chen could see him screaming at his men, trying to restore order. But order was the last thing she wanted them to have. Over the next 3 hours, Chen took 4 more shots. A solar panel on the communications building shattered. A water jug sitting on a wall exploded. The padlock on the weapons cache shot clean through. The tail light on the civilian SUV destroyed. Each shot came from a slightly different position as she moved through her pre-planned hide sites. Each shot suggested a different shooter with different capabilities. The solar panel shot came from the west, the water jug from the north, the padlock from the east, the tail light from the south. The fighters were surrounded, or so they believed. An entire team of American snipers had infiltrated the mountains, established overlapping fields of fire, and was systematically destroying their infrastructure. That was the story Chen was writing in their minds, and they were reading it exactly as she intended. By noon on the second day, the compound looked like a war zone despite having suffered 0 casualties. Water leaked from damaged tanks. The generator sat silent. The radio was dead. Vehicles were damaged. And the fighters were terrified, jumping at every sound, seeing threats in every shadow. Chen transmitted a brief update. Phase 1 complete. Enemy cohesion beginning to fracture. Initiating Phase 2. Ghost out. Hayes received the message and felt something he rarely experienced, genuine awe. In less than 36 hours, without killing a single enemy combatant, Chen had transformed a fortified position into a prison of fear. The enemy hadn't vanished yet, but their confidence had. And in warfare, confidence was everything. Chen chambered a fresh round and prepared for Phase 2. The psychological seeds had been planted. Now it was time to watch them grow into full-blown paranoia that would tear the compound apart from the inside. The butcher had no idea that his worst enemy wasn't outside the walls. It was inside his own mind. Day 2, 1400 hours. The sun beat down mercilessly on the compound, turning it into an oven. Chen watched through her scope as exhaustion settled over the fighters like a heavy blanket. They'd been awake for over 30 hours, nerves stretched to breaking point, jumping at every sound. The butcher paced the compound like a caged animal, his authority visibly crumbling with each passing hour. But Chen wasn't finished, not even close. She'd spent the past 2 hours circling the compound at a distance, collecting items that would serve her purpose. Spent brass casings from Taliban weapons. She'd found dozens scattered in the rocks from previous firefights. A torn piece of cloth that matched local tribal patterns. And most importantly, boot prints in soft earth that she could replicate. This was the art of deception that most snipers never learned. They thought their job ended with the shot, but Chen understood that the most powerful weapon wasn't the bullet, it was doubt. At 1500 hours, when the fighters were at their lowest energy point, Chen made her move. She'd circled to the eastern side of the compound, where a goat trail wound passed the perimeter roughly 200 meters from the walls. The position was exposed, dangerous, but that was exactly why it would work. No sniper would be foolish enough to get that close, which meant the evidence she left would be devastating. Chen moved like smoke, using every rock and depression for cover. She reached a flat section of trail where morning rain had left the earth soft and malleable. Perfect. She removed her boot and pressed it into the mud at an angle, creating a print that suggested someone running. Then another, and another, a trail of 5 prints heading toward a cluster of rocks that overlooked the compound. Next, she scattered the Taliban brass casings she'd collected, placing them carefully around the rocks. Not too many, not too few. Just enough to suggest someone had been here, watching, coordinating. She wedged the torn cloth into a crevice where it would flutter in the wind, visible from the compound if anyone looked carefully. The final touch was inspired. She had one American MRE in her pack, specifically kept for this purpose. She tore open the package, ate the contents quickly, then left the distinctive brown wrapper wedged between rocks, partially buried as if someone had tried to hide it but failed. The scene told a story. American operators had established a forward observation post here, close enough to coordinate the sniper attacks. They'd been careless, left evidence, and they'd been using local fighters as guides or informants. That last detail was the poison pill. When the Taliban found this site, and they would find it, she'd make sure of that, they wouldn't just fear external enemies. They'd start suspecting each other. Chen retreated from the site and returned to her primary hide position. Now she just needed to make sure they discovered her breadcrumbs. She waited until 1700 hours when the guard shift changed. Through her scope, she identified the young, nervous sentry, the one most likely to panic. She aimed 10 feet to his left and fired. The suppressed round struck the wall, spraying rock chips. The sentry screamed and dove for cover, but not before Chen saw him look directly toward the eastern trail, exactly where she'd left the evidence. Perfect. His brain would make the connection. Shot came from the east near that trail. The butcher came running, weapon raised. Chen watched as he organized a patrol, 6 men, heavily armed, moving cautiously toward the eastern approach. She smiled behind her face wrap. They were following the script perfectly. Back at the forward operating base, the Situation Room had become a command performance. Officers who'd initially dismissed Chen's plan now crowded around the monitors, watching the operation unfold in real time through satellite and drone feeds. "What the hell is she doing?" Colonel Morrison muttered, watching the Taliban patrol move away from the compound. "She's drawing them out into the open. This is our chance to light them up." "No," Commander Hayes said firmly, his hand hovering over the radio. "We stick to the plan, no engagement." "Sir, with all respect, we have 6 enemy combatants exposed in the open. We could end this right now with a hellfire strike." Hayes turned to face Morrison, his expression hard. "And we'd kill 6 fighters while the other 9 scatter into the mountains with their weapons and intelligence, and we'd learn nothing about their network. Chen sees something bigger here. Trust the operator." Rodriguez leaned forward, watching Chen's GPS beacon. "She's moving, repositioning again." On the mountain, Chen had already abandoned her hide site. She moved parallel to the patrol, staying well ahead of them, knowing exactly where they were going because she'd planned their route. When they reached the trail and discovered the evidence, she'd be safely positioned 800 meters away, watching their reaction. The patrol reached the site 20 minutes later. Through her scope, Chen watched as they found the boot prints first. One fighter knelt, examining them closely, calling others over. Then they found the brass casings, excited gestures pointing back toward the compound, then the cloth, and finally the American MRE wrapper. The reaction was everything she'd hoped for and more. The patrol leader, a thick-shouldered man with a black beard, began shouting, waving the MRE wrapper like evidence in a trial. He was gesturing between the boot prints and the compound, making accusations. Even from this distance, Chen could read the body language. Someone inside had guided the Americans here. Someone had betrayed them. Two fighters started arguing, shoving each other. The patrol leader had to physically separate them. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were already sprouting. The patrol returned to the compound in disarray, no longer a cohesive unit but a collection of suspicious individuals. The butcher met them at the gate, and Chen watched through her scope as the patrol leader presented the evidence. The MRE wrapper passed from hand to hand. Arguments erupted. Fingers pointed. Accusations flew. Through her directional microphone, a piece of equipment most snipers didn't carry, but Chen had insisted on, she could hear fragments of the heated Pashto conversation. Americans were here, close enough to touch the walls. Someone led them, someone among us. The boot prints, local style, not American military. Traitor, we have a traitor. The butcher's response was swift and brutal. Chen watched as he grabbed one of his own men, the fighter with the limp she'd identified on the first night, and dragged him to the center of the compound. The man protested, pleaded, but the butcher wasn't listening. He was making an example, reasserting control the only way he knew how. Chen turned away from her scope before the execution. She didn't need to see it. She'd known this might happen, had factored it into her psychological profile. Men like the butcher ruled through fear, and when their authority was challenged, they responded with violence. It was predictable. It was also exactly what would accelerate the compound's collapse. The sound of a single gunshot echoed across the valley, then silence. When Chen looked back through her scope, one fighter lay motionless in the compound's center. The others stood frozen, horror and fear written in their body language. They weren't looking at their commander with respect anymore. They were looking at him with terror, and more importantly, with doubt. If the butcher could kill one of them based on circumstantial evidence, he could kill any of them. No one was safe. The paranoia she'd planted had just bloomed into full-blown terror. Chen transmitted her update. Phase 2 complete. Enemy executed one of their own. Cohesion severely compromised. Multiple fighters showing signs of wanting to flee. Estimate compound will be abandoned within 24 hours, maintaining overwatch. At the base, the room fell silent as they processed her report. Jesus Christ, Martinez whispered. She got them to kill each other. Hayes stared at the screen, his expression troubled. The mission was working better than anyone had imagined, but the cost was mounting. An innocent man had just died, executed by his own commander based on evidence Chen had fabricated. Sir, Rodriguez looked at Hayes, waiting for orders. Do we proceed? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the moral weight of what they were doing. Then he nodded slowly. We proceed. Chen was right. Conventional assault would have cost us American lives and taught us nothing about the network. This way we might actually end something bigger than one compound. Even if it means more of them die by their own hands, Morrison asked quietly. Even then, Hayes said, though the words tasted bitter. War isn't clean, Colonel. It's never been clean. We just choose which dirt we're willing to live with. On the mountain, Chen had already moved to her next position. She felt no satisfaction at the execution, only grim acknowledgement that her plan was working. The butcher had made his choice. She'd simply given him the rope. He'd tied his own noose. As darkness fell on the second night, the compound below looked like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Fighters huddled in small groups, no longer trusting each other. The butcher stood alone, isolated by his own brutality. And somewhere in the buildings, Chen knew, Men were packing bags and planning their escape. The enemy hadn't vanished yet, but their unity had. By tomorrow, they would scatter like dust in the wind. And when they did, Chen would be watching, tracking, following them to the real prize, the network that had brought them together in the first place. She chambered a fresh round, ate another energy bar, and settled in for the long night ahead. The hardest part was coming. Staying awake, staying sharp, staying one step ahead of 15 desperate men who would soon realize their fortress had become their tomb. But Chen had been preparing for this her entire career. Every brutal training evolution, every doubter who'd said she couldn't hack it, every mission that had pushed her beyond what she thought possible, it had all led to this moment. She was ready. The question was, would they survive what came next? Day 3, 600 hours. Commander James Hayes stood in the operations center, staring at reports that made less sense the more he read them. 72 hours into Chen's mission, and officially the enemy body count remained at 0, unless you counted the fighter the butcher had executed himself. The Pentagon brass were asking questions. Hard questions. His secure phone buzzed. Hayes closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the caller ID. Colonel Morrison from JSOC Command. This was going to be ugly. Hayes, he answered, keeping his voice neutral. Commander, I'm looking at the sitrep from your AO, and I'm trying to understand what the hell is happening. Morrison's voice crackled through the encrypted line. You have a lone operator in enemy territory for 3 days, no confirmed kills, no tactical advantage that I can see, and you're telling me this is going according to plan. Hayes measured his response carefully. Sir, Lieutenant Chen is executing a psychological warfare operation that's systematically dismantling. I don't want to hear about psychological warfare, Commander. I want to hear about results. We have 15 enemy combatants in a known location. We have air assets on standby. We have a Marine quick reaction force ready to fast rope in and end this in 20 minutes. Instead, we're playing mind games while one of our operators is exposed and vulnerable. With respect, sir, conventional assault on that position would cost us casualties and intelligence. Chen's approach is experimental at best, reckless at worst. Morrison cut him off. I've been reviewing her file. Yes, she's talented. Yes, she's accomplished things that are impressive. But this isn't Kandahar. This is a fortified enemy position with 15 confirmed hostiles. We need to hit them hard and fast before they scatter, or worse, before they figure out it's just one operator out there and hunt her down. Hayes felt his jaw tighten. Sir, I believe in my operator's assessment of the situation. Your belief isn't the issue, Commander. The issue is that we're wasting time and resources on an unproven tactic while actual targets sit in the open. I'm giving you 12 hours. If Chen hasn't produced actionable results by 1800 hours your time, I'm authorizing an immediate assault with or without her extraction. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Hayes ended the call and resisted the urge to throw the phone across the room. Martinez approached, holding a fresh intelligence report. You're not going to like this either, sir. We just intercepted Taliban communications. They're talking about the compound. Word is spreading that Khalid's position has been compromised. If higher command orders them to relocate before we can track their network, then we lose everything Chen's been working toward. Hayes rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 52 years. What's her last position report? She checked in 30 minutes ago. Says the compound is on the verge of collapse. Multiple fighters are openly questioning the butcher's leadership. She's observing signs of preparation for movement, packing supplies, fueling vehicles, arguing about routes. Rodriguez joined them, laptop in hand. Sir, I've been analyzing the pattern of Chen's shots and movements. She's not just attacking randomly. Look. He pulled up a tactical map showing Chen's positions over the past 72 hours. Every position she's taken gives her line of sight to potential escape routes. She's been hurting them, sir, cutting off certain exits, leaving others open. Hayes studied the map, seeing it clearly now. Chen wasn't just breaking their morale, she was channeling their eventual retreat into specific corridors where they could be tracked. She's been planning their escape route from the beginning. Exactly. And if they run in the next 12 hours, she'll be positioned to follow the primary targets while our drones track the rest. A young intelligence analyst approached, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, we have another problem. CIA just flagged unusual activity near the Pakistani border. They're picking up increased communications from a location that's been dormant for months. They think it might be a Taliban logistics hub." "Let me guess," Hayes said, "northeast of Chen's position." The analyst looked surprised. "Yes, sir, how did you?" "Because Chen already knows about it. She's been driving them toward it." Hayes felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. Chen wasn't just dismantling one cell. She was following the threads to the spider at the center of the web. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Chen. "Enemy preparing to abandon compound. Estimate movement within 6 hours. Primary targets will separate from main group. Request ISR drone support for tracking. Critical, do not engage fleeing fighters. Repeat, no engagement. They will lead us to regional command structure. This is bigger than one compound. Trust me." Hayes stared at the message. Trust me. Two simple words that could either validate his career or end it. If Chen was right, they'd dismantle an entire network. If she was wrong, 15 Taliban fighters would escape, American resources would be wasted, and his judgment would be questioned for the rest of his career. Martinez read the message over his shoulder. "Sir, if we let them run and Morrison finds out." "Morrison will have my rank insignia," Hayes finished. "I know." "So what do we do?" Hayes looked at the map, at the small blue dot representing Chen's position, alone in those mountains. She'd been right about everything so far: the psychological breakdown, the execution, the compound's deteriorating cohesion. Every prediction had materialized exactly as she described. He made his decision. "Get me every ISR asset we have in theater. Predator drones, Global Hawks, anything with a camera and long loiter time. I want complete coverage of that entire valley and every route leading northeast." "Sir, that's a lot of assets for one operation. Command is going to ask why." "Tell them we're tracking a major enemy movement." "Which is true." Hayes started issuing orders rapid fire. "Rodriguez, I want our signals intelligence focused on any communications coming from that compound. If they're calling for extraction or coordinating with other cells, I want to know immediately. Martinez, coordinate with the Marine QRF but tell them to hold position. No movement without my direct order." "What about Colonel Morrison's 12-hour deadline?" Rodriguez asked. Hayes checked his watch. "We have until 1800 hours. Chen says they'll move within 6 hours. That gives us time barely. If she's right, by the time Morrison's deadline hits, we'll have actionable intelligence that justifies everything. If she's wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what failure meant. The operations center hummed with activity as assets were repositioned. On the large display screen, drone feeds began populating, showing different angles of the compound and surrounding terrain. Hayes watched the tiny figures moving inside the compound, men loading vehicles, arguing, preparing for departure. "Sir, we have movement," an analyst called out. 3 fighters just left the compound on foot heading south. Should we track them?" Hayes looked at Chen's position on the map. She had clear line of sight to the southern route. "Negative. Chen will monitor them. Keep our drones focused on the main compound and northeastern routes." Another report came in. Vehicles starting up inside the compound, the civilian SUV. Then another, 2 more fighters departing on foot western route. The compound was bleeding fighters like a punctured tire losing air. Chen's psychological warfare had worked exactly as she'd predicted. But the real test was coming. Would the Butcher and his key lieutenants lead them to something bigger, Or would they simply vanish into the mountains? Hayes's phone rang again. Morrison. He let it go to voicemail. He couldn't afford the distraction right now, couldn't afford to have his orders countermanded before Chen's gambit played out. "Sir, encrypted message from Chen," Rodriguez said, routing it to Hayes's station. Hayes read it quickly. Butcher and 2 lieutenants loading heavy packs. Personal weapons only, no crew-served equipment. They're running, not repositioning for defense. Estimate departure in 90 minutes. Will follow on foot. Request 0 radio communication during pursuit to maintain stealth. Will check in every 12 hours unless compromised. This is it. Ghost out. 90 minutes. Hayes felt time compress around him. In 90 minutes, Chen would disappear deeper into enemy territory, following 3 high-value targets into unknown terrain with 0 support. If something went wrong, if she was compromised or injured, they might not even know until it was too late. Martinez voiced what they were all thinking. "Sir, this is insane. We're letting her go dark while tracking 3 armed enemy combatants alone, based on a theory that they'll lead her to some bigger target we're not even sure exists." "You're right," Hayes said quietly. "It is insane. It's also brilliant. Chen isn't guessing, Martinez. She's been studying these networks for years. She knows how they think, how they operate, how they'll react under pressure. Everything she's predicted has come true. But what if this time she's wrong?" Hayes looked at the map one more time, at that blue dot representing one of the finest operators he'd ever commanded. "Then we'll move heaven and earth to bring her home. But I don't think she's wrong. I think we're about to see something that changes how we fight this entire war." He picked up his phone and recorded a message for Morrison. "Sir Hayes, enemy is abandoning the target compound as of 6:30 hours. We are tracking all personnel with ISR assets. Expect major intelligence development within 24 hours. We'll brief you personally when operation concludes. Hayes out." It was a calculated risk, recording a message instead of taking the call, promising results he couldn't guarantee. But Chen had earned his trust, and he would give her the time she needed. Drone feed shows the Butcher emerging from the main building, an analyst reported. He's with 2 others heavily laden. They're moving to the eastern gate. Hayes leaned forward, watching the screen intently. This was it, the moment that would prove Chen right or end both their careers. "All stations, this is command," Hayes said into his headset. "Primary targets are moving. Track but do not engage. Repeat, observe only, no engagement. Let's see where these bastards lead us." On the mountain, Chen watched through her scope as the Butcher and his 2 most trusted men left the compound and started northeast into the mountains. She'd already packed her gear, ready to follow. In 3 days, she turned a fortified position into a ghost town without firing a shot at a human target. Now came the hard part, tracking them through hostile territory to find the real prize. She took one last look at the compound through her scope. The remaining fighters were scattering in different directions, leaderless and broken. Mission accomplished, but the real mission was just beginning. Chen shouldered her pack and disappeared into the mountains like smoke, following 3 men who had no idea they were leading America's most unconventional warrior straight to the heart of their network. The hunt continued. Day 4, 7:30 hours. Chen moved through the mountain terrain like a shadow, maintaining a consistent kilometer distance behind her 3 targets. The Butcher and his 2 lieutenants, she designated them Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie in her mental tracking system, moved with purpose but not panic. They knew these mountains, had probably used these routes for years. That familiarity made them confident. It also made them predictable. Through her rangefinder, she observed their body language, their rest patterns, the way they communicated. Alpha, the Butcher, led with aggressive strides, constantly checking his 6 but never looking up at the ridgelines where Chen paralleled their route. Bravo, the stockier of the 2 lieutenants, carried the heaviest pack and a satellite phone that he checked obsessively. Charlie, lean and nervous, kept his hand near his weapon at all times. They were running, but they were running towards something, not away. That distinction was crucial. Chen keyed her GPS tracker, marking waypoints every 30 minutes. The ISR drones overhead were tracking the targets via thermal imaging, but she was gathering information the drones couldn't capture, the subtle details that told the real story. When Alpha stopped to drink water, he faced northeast, as if orienting himself toward a known destination. When Bravo made a brief satellite call, he spoke in low, urgent tones, gesturing in that same northeastern direction. They weren't lost. They were going home. Back at the forward operating base, the operations center had transformed into a multi-agency hub. CIA analysts worked alongside military intelligence, tracking not just Chen's targets but the 11 other fighters who'd fled the compound in different directions. Each one was being monitored, their routes mapped, their communications intercepted. Commander Hayes stood at the center of it all, watching multiple screens simultaneously. "Talk to me about the dispersal pattern," he said to the senior intelligence analyst, a sharp-eyed woman named Captain Lisa Warren. "Sir, it's textbook network behavior," Warren reported, pulling up a comprehensive map. "The lower-level fighters are heading to villages where we've previously identified family connections. They're going to ground, probably planning to lay low for weeks or months. But these three," she highlighted Chen's targets in red, "they're not stopping. They've been moving for 6 hours straight, minimal rest, maintaining tactical awareness. They're heading somewhere specific." "And Chen?" Hayes asked, though he could see her blue dot tracking parallel to the red ones. "Maintaining perfect distance. She's using terrain mastery to stay invisible. The targets have no idea they're being followed." Warren zoomed in on the topography. "Sir, if they maintain this heading, they're going to cross into Pakistan within 36 hours. Hayes felt his stomach tighten. Pakistan meant international complications, political nightmares, and potential violations of sovereign territory. "Do we have authorization for cross-border pursuit?" "Working on it, sir. State Department is drafting emergency protocols, but it's going to take time." "Time we might not have." Hayes checked his watch. He'd successfully avoided Colonel Morrison's direct calls for the past 6 hours, but that grace period was ending. "Get me whatever authorization you can, even if it's verbal and unofficial. I'm not losing Chen or these targets because of paperwork." On the mountain, Chen had found an overwatch position on a rocky outcrop that gave her clear visibility for 2 kilometers. The 3 targets had stopped for what appeared to be a scheduled rest break. Through her spotting scope, she'd switched from her rifle scope to preserve the weapon's zero. She watched them with intense focus. Bravo pulled out the satellite phone again. This time the call lasted longer, nearly 5 minutes. Chen wished she could intercept the communication, but her equipment wasn't designed for signals intelligence. That was the drone's job. What she could see, however, was the body language. Bravo was receiving instructions, nodding, occasionally gesturing. When he ended the call, he showed the phone to Alpha, pointing at what must have been GPS coordinates. They had a specific destination, and they just confirmed the route. Chen transmitted a brief encrypted burst. "Targets received communication. Destination confirmed. Continuing pursuit. Estimate border crossing in 36 hours. Will need authorization for cross-border operations. Ghost out." The response came back within minutes. "Authorization in progress. Maintain pursuit. Additional assets being positioned for potential extraction if needed. Stay safe. Overwatch out." Chen allowed herself a slight smile. Hayes was backing her play, even when it meant taking massive professional risks. That kind of trust was rare and precious. She wouldn't waste it. As the targets resumed their movement, Chen noticed something that made her blood run cold. A 4th figure had emerged from behind a rock formation ahead of the targets, a man who'd apparently been waiting for them. The rendezvous was brief but significant. The new arrival handed Alpha a package, spoke for perhaps 2 minutes, then disappeared back into the rocks, heading in a different direction. Chen's mind raced. A pre-planned meeting point. A courier. This wasn't a panicked retreat. It was an organized withdrawal along an established escape route. The network was more sophisticated than anyone had realized. She marked the courier's position and direction, transmitting the data immediately. The drones would track him as well. One target had just become 4, and each one was a thread leading deeper into the web. The next 12 hours blurred into a rhythm of movement and observation. Chen's body operated on autopilot, muscles conditioned by years of training to function despite exhaustion. She ate while walking, hydrated from her camelback without breaking stride, and maintained situational awareness even as fatigue tugged at her consciousness. The terrain grew more rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains. Chen's altimeter read 3,200 meters above sea level. The air was thin, each breath requiring conscious effort. But the targets were struggling too. She could see it in their slower pace, their more frequent rest stops. They were human, vulnerable, and they were leading her exactly where she needed to go. At 1900 hours, as darkness fell on the 4th day, the targets made camp in a small valley sheltered from the wind. Chen established her hide site on the high ground, 800 meters distant. Through her night vision, she watched them build a small fire, cook a meal, and settle in for the night. They posted no sentry. Either they believed they were safe, or they were too exhausted to maintain proper security. Chen couldn't afford the same luxury. She set her watch for 20-minute intervals, allowing herself brief periods of rest while staying alert for any movement. This was the dangerous time, when her body wanted to surrender to sleep, when mistakes happened, when operators got sloppy and died. But Chen had learned to push past exhaustion during Hell Week in Bud S, during the Q course, during every training evolution that had tried to break her. Her instructors had taught her that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible. Pain was temporary. Failure was permanent. At 400 hours, Chen's watch alarm buzzed softly. She came instantly alert, scanning the target area through her thermal scope. The 3 men were still asleep around the dying fire. Perfect. She used the dark hours before dawn to move closer, establishing a new hide site that would give her better visibility when they resumed movement. As dawn broke on the 5th day, Chen had been in the field for 96 hours. 4 days with minimal sleep, constant physical exertion, and the psychological pressure of maintaining perfect operational security. Most operators would be hallucinating by now, their judgment compromised by exhaustion. Chen felt sharp as a blade. This was what she'd trained for. This was what she was built to do. The targets woke, broke camp with efficient movements, and resumed their northeastern trek. Chen followed, a ghost they would never see, never hear, never suspect. With each kilometer, they moved deeper into the mountains and closer to the Pakistani border. And with each kilometer, Chen moved closer to the prize that would justify everything. The risk, the exhaustion, the career gamble that Hayes had taken on her behalf. By 1400 hours, Chen spotted something that made her heart race. In a valley ahead, partially concealed by natural rock formations, she could see structures. Not a village, the layout was wrong. Not a casual camp, too permanent, too organized. This was a compound, larger and more sophisticated than the one they'd abandoned. The targets were heading straight for it. Chen found a concealed position on a ridgeline and began her reconnaissance. Through her spotting scope, she counted buildings, vehicles, personnel. Her pulse quickened with each observation. This wasn't just a hideout. This was a logistics hub, maybe even a regional headquarters. She'd found the heart of the network. Chen transmitted her most important message yet. Primary targets arriving at major compound. Count, 23 additional enemy personnel, 3 vehicles with Iranian plates, significant communications equipment, weapons cache visible. This is a regional command node. Request full ISR coverage and prepare for exploitation. Recommend joint task force. This is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. Ghost out. At the base, Hayes read the message and felt validation and dread in equal measure. Chen had been right. The gambit had paid off, but now they faced a target that would require significant resources to exploit properly. He picked up his secure phone and finally called Colonel Morrison back. "Sir," Hayes said, his voice steady and confident, "I need to brief you on a major development. Lieutenant Chen has just located what appears to be a Taliban regional headquarters. We're going to need everything we've got." The real operation was about to begin. Day 5, 1500 hours. Chen lay motionless on the ridgeline, her body molded into the rocks like she'd become part of the mountain itself. Through her spotting scope, the compound below revealed itself in layers, like peeling back the pages of a deadly intelligence report written in stone and steel. The facility was far more sophisticated than anything intelligence had predicted in this region. 3 main buildings formed a U-shape around a central courtyard. Solar panels covered the roofs, reliable power generation independent of noisy generators. A concealed antenna array suggested serious communications capability. The vehicles parked in a covered bay included not just the typical Toyota technical trucks, but 2 newer SUVs with Pakistani diplomatic plates and 1 Mercedes sedan that screamed high-value personnel. But it was the people that told the real story. Chen counted and recounted, documenting every face, every weapon, every movement pattern. 23 fighters, but not the typical ragtag Taliban foot soldiers. These men moved with discipline, posted sentries in overlapping fields of fire, and maintained weapons that looked new and well-maintained. This was a professional operation. Through her scope, she watched as Alpha, the butcher, was greeted at the compound entrance by a man who carried himself with unmistakable authority. Older, perhaps 50, with a gray beard and expensive-looking traditional dress. He embraced the butcher warmly, but even from 1,200 meters away, Chen could read the power dynamic. The butcher was reporting to a superior, and that superior was someone significant. Chen's camera clicked softly, capturing hundreds of high-resolution images. Faces, vehicles, weapons, defensive positions, entry points, vulnerabilities. Every detail was ammunition for the mission planners who would eventually have to exploit this target. Her job was to give them a perfect picture. At the forward operating base, the operations center had exploded into controlled chaos. Every intelligence agency with assets in theater wanted a piece of this. CIA, NSA, Defense Intelligence, and even FBI counterterrorism were crowding into the feed, watching the same images Chen was transmitting in real time via her encrypted satellite uplink. Commander Hayes stood at the center of the storm, fielding calls and coordinating assets with a calm that belied the pressure he was under. Colonel Morrison had arrived via helicopter an hour ago, and his presence added both authority and scrutiny to the operation. "Commander Hayes," Morrison said, studying the live feed from the ISR drones now circling at high altitude above Chen's position. "I owe you an apology, and an admission that I was wrong." Hayes nodded, accepting the words without gloating. "Sir, we're not finished yet. This target is going to require significant planning." "Agreed. I've already coordinated with JSOC. We're assembling a joint task force: SEALs, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Special Tactics, and Explosive Ordnance Disposal. But first, we need complete intelligence. How long can Chen maintain observation? She's been in the field for 5 days with minimal rest. But if I know her, she'll stay until we tell her to leave or until she physically can't function." Hayes keyed his microphone. "Ghost, this is Overwatch. What's your status?" Chen's response came after a brief delay, her voice slightly hoarse but steady. "Operational. Hydration adequate. Food for 2 more days. Position is secure and undetected. Can maintain Overwatch indefinitely. Recommend time-sensitive exploitation. This target is too valuable to let sit." Morrison leaned toward the microphone. "Ghost, this is Colonel Morrison, JSOC. Outstanding work. We're spinning up a full assault package, but we need complete intelligence on that facility. Guard rotations, weapon placements, number of rooms in each building, potential HVTs, everything. Can you provide that level of detail?" "Affirmative, sir. Already on it." "Stand by for comprehensive package within 6 hours." Morrison looked at Hayes with genuine respect. She's something special, isn't she? She's the best operator I've ever commanded, Hayes said simply. Male or female, she's the best. Part 7. The Serpent's Den, extended 850 words. Day 5, 1500 hours. Chen lay motionless on the ridgeline, her body molded into the rocks like she'd become part of the mountain itself. Through her spotting scope, the compound below revealed itself in layers, like peeling back the pages of a deadly intelligence report written in stone and steel. The facility was far more sophisticated than anything intelligence had predicted in this region. 3 main buildings formed a U-shape around a central courtyard. Solar panels covered the roofs, reliable power generation independent of noisy generators. A concealed antenna array suggested serious communications capability. The vehicles parked in a covered bay included not just the typical Toyota technical trucks, but 2 newer SUVs with Pakistani diplomatic plates, and 1 Mercedes sedan that screamed high-value personnel. But it was the people that told the real story. Chen counted and recounted, documenting every face, every weapon, every movement pattern. 23 fighters, but not the typical ragtag Taliban foot soldiers. These men moved with discipline, posted sentries in overlapping fields of fire, and maintained weapons that looked new and well-maintained. This was a professional operation. Through her scope, she watched as Alpha, the butcher, was greeted at the compound entrance by a man who carried himself with unmistakable authority. Older, perhaps 50, with a gray beard and expensive-looking traditional dress. He embraced the butcher warmly, but even from 1,200 meters away, Chen could read the power dynamic. The butcher was reporting to a superior, and that superior was someone significant. Chen's camera clicked softly, capturing hundreds of high-resolution images. Faces, vehicles, weapons, defensive positions, entry points, vulnerabilities. Every detail was ammunition for the mission planners who would eventually have to exploit this target. Her job was to give them a perfect picture. At the forward operating base, the operations center had exploded into controlled chaos. Every intelligence agency with assets in theater wanted a piece of this. CIA, NSA, Defense Intelligence, and even FBI counterterrorism were crowding into the feed, watching the same images Chen was transmitting in real time via her encrypted satellite uplink. Commander Hayes stood at the center of the storm, fielding calls and coordinating assets with a calm that belied the pressure he was under. Colonel Morrison had arrived via helicopter an hour ago, and his presence added both authority and scrutiny to the operation. "Commander Hayes," Morrison said, studying the live feed from the ISR drones now circling at high altitude above Chen's position. "I owe you an apology and an admission that I was wrong." Hayes nodded, accepting the words without gloating. "Sir, we're not finished yet. This target is going to require significant planning." "Agreed. I've already coordinated with JSOC. We're assembling a joint task force SEALs, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Special Tactics, and Explosive Ordnance Disposal. But first, we need complete intelligence. How long can Chen maintain observation?" "She's been in the field for 5 days with minimal rest. But if I know her, she'll stay until we tell her to leave or until she physically can't function." Hayes keyed his microphone. "Ghost, this is Overwatch. What's your status?" Chen's response came after a brief delay, her voice slightly hoarse but steady. "Operational. Hydration adequate, food for 2 more days. Position is secure and undetected. Can maintain Overwatch indefinitely. Recommend time-sensitive exploitation. This target is too valuable to let sit." Morrison leaned toward the microphone. "Ghost, this is Colonel Morrison, JSOC. Outstanding work. We're spinning up a full assault package, but we need complete intelligence on that facility. Guard rotations, weapon placements, number of rooms in each building, potential HVTs, everything. Can you provide that level of detail?" "Affirmative, sir. Already on it. Stand by for comprehensive package within 6 hours." Morrison looked at Hayes with genuine respect. She's something special, isn't she? She's the best operator I've ever commanded, Hayes said simply. Male or female, she's the best. On the ridgeline, Chen had already begun the painstaking process of creating a complete tactical picture. She'd switched between her various optics, rifle scope, spotting scope, thermal imaging, and her camera's telephoto lens, to gather different types of intelligence. She marked guard positions on her tactical computer, noting rotation times and overlap patterns. She counted windows in each building, identified potential breaching points, and assessed structural vulnerabilities. At 1700 hours, she observed something that elevated the target's importance even further. A convoy arrived, 3 vehicles with armed escorts. From the lead vehicle emerged a man in Western clothing, expensive suit, and polished shoes that had no business in these mountains. He was greeted with the same deference as the gray-bearded commander, but the body language was different. This wasn't a military relationship. This was business. Chen photographed everything. The Western-dressed man's face, his vehicle's plates, the aluminum briefcases his bodyguards carried, the 30-minute meeting in the main building, and his departure with one of the gray-bearded commander's men accompanying him. She transmitted immediately, possible foreign national on site, non-military appearance, professional security detail, high-level meeting with compound leadership. Vehicle plates suggest Iranian origin. Recommend facial recognition and vehicle tracking. This may be an international facilitation network, not just regional Taliban. At the base, CIA analysts jumped on the information. Within 20 minutes, they had a preliminary identification. Reza Ahmadi, a known Iranian Quds Force facilitator suspected of weapons trafficking and terrorist financing. If he was here, this compound wasn't just a Taliban safe house. It was an international terrorist hub. This changes everything, Morrison said, watching the replay of Ahmadi's visit. This is a Tier 1 target now. We're not just hitting a Taliban cell. We're disrupting an international network. Hayes felt the weight of the mission shift. We need State Department coordination, probably White House approval for an operation this sensitive. I'll handle the politics, Morrison said. You handle the tactical. How soon can we strike? Hayes pulled up the tactical planning software. Minimum 12 hours to position all assets. Recommend a dawn raid, 0530 local time tomorrow. That gives Chen tonight to finalize intelligence and get to a safe extraction point. Make it happen. Back on the mountain, Chen had found a more concealed position with better overhead cover. The ISR drones were maintaining high altitude to avoid detection, but she knew that sophisticated adversaries sometimes had counter-surveillance capability. She couldn't risk compromising the target before the strike force arrived. As darkness fell, the compound lit up with electric lights, another indication of their reliable power system. Chen switched to thermal imaging and continued her surveillance. She watched the evening routine, meals being prepared, guards changing shifts, rooms lighting up and going dark as personnel moved through the buildings. At 2100 hours, she witnessed something that made her blood run cold. The gray-bearded commander gathered his leadership in the central courtyard. Through her directional microphone, she picked up fragments of conversation in Pashto. Words like American, compromise, and relocate drifted across the valley. They knew. They didn't know specifically what, but they suspected something was wrong. Maybe the butcher's arrival with only 2 men instead of 15 had raised questions. Maybe they'd heard about the compound's abandonment through their network. Whatever the reason, they were considering moving. Chen transmitted urgently, target suspects compromise, leadership discussing possible relocation, recommend accelerate strike timeline. If they move, we lose them and the intelligence they possess. Time-critical situation. Ghost out. Hayes received the message and made an instant decision. Morrison, we need to move now, tonight. If they relocate, we'll never find them again. Morrison didn't hesitate. Agreed, spin up all assets. I want boots on target in 6 hours. Can we do that? Hayes was already issuing orders. Marine Force Recon is 30 minutes out by helo. SEAL team can be airborne in 20. Air support is on standby. We can make it happen. Then do it. And Hayes, get Chen to a safe position for extraction. She's done her job. Time for the door kickers to finish it. Hayes keyed his mic. Ghost, this is Overwatch. Strike is happening tonight, 6 hours. I need you to move to Extraction Point Delta and await pickup. You've earned this. Let the assault team handle it from here. There was a long pause before Chen responded. Negative, Overwatch. I'm staying for the strike. I can provide real-time intelligence and overwatch for the assault force. My position gives me complete visibility of the compound. I can guide them through the defenses. Ghost, you've been in position for over 30 hours without sleep. You're running on fumes. Sir, with respect, I've trained for exactly this scenario. I can provide laser designation for precision strikes, call out threats the assault team can't see, and ensure maximum effectiveness with minimum friendly casualties. This is why I'm here. Let me finish the job. Hayes looked at Morrison, who nodded slowly. She's right. Having eyes on from her position during the assault is invaluable. Give her the option. Ghost, you're approved to maintain overwatch during the assault, but if things go sideways, you extract immediately. That's an order. Understood, sir. I'll paint the targets. You bring the thunder, Ghost out. Chen settled into her position, checking her laser designator and ensuring her communications were solid. In 6 hours, this valley would erupt in violence. Helicopters would thunder over the ridges. Missiles would turn buildings into rubble, and she would be the invisible guardian angel guiding destruction with surgical precision. She'd spent 5 days tracking these men, understanding their network, documenting their operation. Now she would watch it all come crashing down. The hunter's work was almost complete. Soon, the predators would descend, and the serpent's den would become a grave. Chen chambered a fresh round and waited for the storm she'd called down from the heavens. Day 6, 4:30 hours. The mountains held their breath in the pre-dawn darkness. Chen had been awake for 43 consecutive hours, her body sustained by nothing but willpower, energy gels, and the crystal-clear focus that came from knowing she was exactly where she needed to be. Through her night vision, the compound below looked peaceful, almost serene. The guards had changed shifts 20 minutes ago. Most of the compound's inhabitants were still asleep, unaware that death was inbound at 500 miles per hour. Ghost, this is Viper 1. The voice crackled in her earpiece. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, SEAL Team 3's assault commander. We're 15 minutes out. 4 Black Hawks, 16 operators plus Marine Force Recon. Air support standing by. We're counting on your eyes. Chen keyed her mic. Copy, Viper 1. Compound shows 21 heat signatures currently. Most concentrated in Building Alpha, the main barracks. 3 sentries active, 1 north wall, 1 east gate, 1 roaming. HVT, the Greybeard commander, is in Building Charlie, northwest corner, 2nd floor. The Butcher is 1 floor below him. Be advised, they have weapons cache in Building Bravo. Recommend precision strike on that structure first to prevent them from mounting heavy resistance. Solid copy, Ghost. Your laser designation will guide the Hellfires. You call the shots, we'll follow your lead. Chen felt a surge of satisfaction. 5 days of exhaustion, doubt, and solitary warfare had led to this moment. They were listening. They trusted her. She'd proven that unconventional warfare could be just as devastating as overwhelming force, maybe more so. Viper 1, be advised, targets discussed relocation last night. They're spooked. Don't expect a surrender, they'll fight. Roger that. We're not here for prisoners anyway. JAG has authorized lethal force for all military-age males on site. This is a cleanup operation. At the forward operating base, Commander Hayes watched 6 different screens simultaneously. Drone feeds showed the approaching helicopters, thermal imaging of the compound, and Chen's position marked by her GPS beacon. His hands were steady, but his heart raced. Everything they'd gambled on, his career, Chen's life, the unconventional tactics that had drawn skepticism and outright mockery, was about to be validated or condemned in the next 30 minutes. Colonel Morrison stood beside him, arms crossed. "Hell of a gamble you took, Commander." "Yes, sir." "Hell of a payoff if it works." "Yes, sir." Rodriguez monitored communications, his headset crackling with multiple radio nets coordinating the assault. Martinez handled the tactical display, marking friendly and enemy positions in real time. Captain Warren and her intelligence team were recording everything, knowing this operation would be studied for years as either a revolutionary success or a catastrophic failure. On the mountain, Chen began her final preparations. She'd repositioned twice during the night, finding the perfect overwatch location, a rocky prominence that gave her unobstructed views of all 3 buildings and both entry points. Her laser designator was mounted and ready. Her rifle was loaded with armor-piercing rounds in case she needed to engage hardened targets. Her escape route was planned and rehearsed mentally a dozen times. "Ghost, Viper 1, we have visual on the compound. Beginning approach. Your call on weapons release." Chen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. 21 human beings were about to die, and she would be the architect of their destruction. Some would call it murder. She called it war. These men had executed villagers, planned attacks on American forces, and facilitated terrorism across the region. They'd made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. "Viper 1 Ghost, I have laser lock on Building Bravo, the weapons cache. Fire when ready." Missiles away. Time to impact 15 seconds. Chen watched through her scope as 2 Hellfire missiles streaked across the dawn sky, their contrails painting lines of death. The laser designation kept them locked perfectly on target. At this range, she could see individual roof tiles, the rust on the metal door. The building exploded in a ball of orange flame. The shockwave rolled across the valley like thunder. Secondary explosions ripped through the structure as stored ammunition cooked off. The entire building collapsed in on itself, removing the compound's heavy weapons from the equation in one devastating strike. The compound erupted into chaos. Men poured from buildings, some dressed, some in sleeping clothes, all armed. The sentries opened fire blindly into the darkness, having no idea where the attack had come from. Ghost, Viper 1 were coming in hot, north and south simultaneously. Designate priority targets. Chen's training took over. Her voice became calm, clinical, detached from the violence she was orchestrating. Building Alpha, main barracks, multiple hostiles, marked with laser. Her designator painted the building. 2 more Hellfires impacted, this time targeting the barracks. The structure didn't explode, it simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater and burning rubble. 15 fighters died in their beds, never knowing what hit them. The Black Hawks roared over the ridgeline, their door gunners opening up with M134 miniguns. Red tracers carved through the dawn like deadly light shows. Chen saw men cut down as they tried to run, their bodies spinning and falling in the compound's courtyard. Ghost, need confirmation on HVT location. Building Charlie, 2nd floor. Affirmative, northwest corner. Be advised the butcher is 1 floor below. Both targets are priority. Copy, breaching team moving in now. Chen watched as 8 SEALs fast-roped from 2 helicopters directly onto Building Charlie's roof. Explosive charges blew the roof access. Flashbangs lit up the windows. Gunfire echoed across the valley, short, controlled bursts that spoke of professionals at work. 3 minutes later, Viper 1 has the HVT. Graybeard is KIA, securing 2nd floor now. Chen felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, just focus. Copy. Be advised the butcher may attempt escape through the western exit. I have eyes on it. As if on cue, A figure burst from the western door of Building Charlie, running toward the vehicle bay. Through her scope, Chen recognized him instantly. Khalid the Butcher Nazari, the man who'd executed 3 village elders, murdered civilians, and yesterday had killed his own fighter in paranoid rage. He was running for a motorcycle, probably hopping to escape into the mountains where helicopters couldn't follow. Chen's crosshairs settled on his center mass. 800 meters, slight wind from the east, uphill shot, target moving at approximately 15 miles per hour. She'd made harder shots in training. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle coughed once. Through the scope, she watched the butcher stumble, pitch forward, and collapse 10 feet from the motorcycle. He tried to crawl, determined to escape even while dying. Chen's second shot ended his struggle. Viper 1 Ghost, the butcher is down. Compound is yours. Roger that, Ghost. Damn fine shooting. Assault team is clearing the remaining structures now. Marine Force Recon is securing the perimeter. This is going to be a massive intelligence haul. Hard drives, documents, sat phones. You just gave us the keys to an entire network. The firefight lasted another 7 minutes, but the outcome was never in doubt. The compound's defenders were outnumbered, outgunned, and had been caught completely unprepared. By the time the sun rose fully over the mountains, 23 enemy fighters lay dead, and not a single American had been scratched. Chen transmitted her final message, compound secure, requesting extraction, Ghost out. The Chinook that picked her up 30 minutes later felt surreal after 5 days of solitary warfare. The crew chief had to physically help her stand. Her legs had forgotten how to function properly after so many hours in static positions. She collapsed onto the troop seat, and only then did the exhaustion hit her like a physical force. Commander Hayes met her on the tarmac at Bagram Airfield. Chen tried to salute, but her arm wouldn't cooperate. Hayes waved it off and helped her toward the medical tent. "They're calling it the Ghost Protocol," he said, steadying her as she stumbled. "Your tactics, psychological warfare, enemy tracking, intelligence-driven operations. JSOC wants to develop it as official doctrine. They want you to teach it." Chen managed a weak smile. "Tell them I need sleep first." "You've earned it. The intelligence haul from that compound is unprecedented. Names, numbers, bank accounts, safe house locations, weapons caches. We're rolling up cells across 3 provinces because of what you found. The Secretary of Defense wants to brief you personally." But Chen was barely listening. The adrenaline was crashing, her body finally accepting that the mission was over. Medics swarmed her, checking vitals, starting an IV for dehydration. Someone mentioned malnutrition and severe sleep deprivation. Rodriguez appeared, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine awe. "Crazy like a fox, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "You made an entire network disappear." Chen's eyes were already closing, but she heard it. Heard the respect, the validation, the acknowledgement that her way, the unconventional way, the psychological way, the patient way, had worked better than anyone imagined. As morphine dulled the edges of her consciousness, she heard whispered conversations around her. 43 enemies eliminated with 1 operator. 0 American casualties. Complete network disruption. Recommending her for the Navy Cross. The last thing Chen heard before sleep claimed her was Hayes's voice. "She didn't just win a battle. She changed how we fight the war." Lieutenant Sarah Ghost, Chen had entered those mountains 5 days ago with nothing but a rifle, a plan, and the conviction that psychological warfare could achieve what brute force couldn't. She emerged as a legend. They'd called her crazy. They'd mocked her plan. They'd doubted every unconventional tactic. By morning, the enemy had vanished, not through conventional assault, but because she'd turned their fortress into their tomb
Bella.
and their
Ma anche detto,
escape
allora me
into
lo
a
gioco off
trap.
stream. Se dici che è così
The
figo,
Ghost
devo andare a
Protocol
portare
was
fuori la
born,
bestia. Vai, vai, la
and
mia
warfare
cagnolina.
would
Un
never be the
beso, buona
same.
continuazione. Ciao Zar, grazie
The
per essere
end.
passato. Ti auguro una buonissima giornata, un buonissimo sabato. No, no, non sento niente, Patato, non voglio spoilerarmi in caso. Basta con quella saga. Sì, sì. Raga, ma la vostra classe preferita di Baldur's Gate? Perfetto. Basta dire la parola classe, non... Basta! No, anche il sabato fino alle 13. Ah, tu fai 2 volte a settimana fino alle 14. No, io facevo 2 volte a settimana fino alle 13:50. Le altre